Good morning, friends and colleagues all. Let me say a special welcome to Dr. Leacock, to Ms. Robinson. Thank you very much for your remarks and for being here and for hosting this very important inauguration. As I look around the room, I'm almost tempted to ask if everyone can introduce themselves before we start. It feels like a very intimate family, a very experienced family, as I look at some of the faces that I've enjoyed seeing over the years in media in Barbados and regionally. This region has a very, very strong integrative position in media. And as I look around the room, I see some people who have been, including yourself, Dr. Leacock, pioneers, not just in this region, but globally. And certainly with International Women's Day almost upon us, I would have to acknowledge the specific role of women media leaders in this room, Sonia, Tesha, and Dr. Leacock, and others, in showing the potential, in showing the scope, in showing the transformational leadership that women bring to this kind of work, perhaps in a different way from others. And I feel in great company to be able to be in this room with you. So I will not, Alison, ask for introductions. But I will, since I'm going to be in trouble anyway, I might as well take some extra time after the opening and during the networking and say hello to some of you, because it really feels wonderful to see many of you here. I'm also delighted to see some of our younger people in media and communications. I often feel that admiration and inspiration has to be intergenerational, in the sense that I am often very inspired by those coming after me. I'm often very inspired, and sorry to embarrass you, Crystal, but I tell you this all the time, by young men and women who are forging their own way in this sector and doing tremendous work, and doing it in your way. And showing us what your own ideas of innovation look like. I am very inspired by that. And those of you in the room with whom I've had this conversation know that I expect wonderful things from this next generation. So I want to start by congratulating you all on the establishment of the Caribbean chapter of the International Institute of Communications, and to our own Dr. Leacock on being named the director to the IIC board. ICC is very easy to say at this kind of time. For cricket fans, it rolls off the tongue. But sorry, IIC board. I may be happier than most, or perhaps happier than many, that IIC Caribbean has been established at such a time as this. And one only need to have picked up the paper this morning to see why. There are some critical conversations that have to be had. And many of these critical conversations, I dare say, are not for governments of the region to lead. Many of these critical conversations, and as I was preparing to speak with you this morning, I did some reading about the work of IIC, and I thought, how have I not known this before? Because the conversations that you have, the role that you play in public understanding, in discourse, in understanding really what is the public interest of this work, what is the public mischief that can attend, and how do we help all stakeholders understand what is at stake, what are the opportunities, and what are the next steps for all of us. So let me just say that as the Minister of Technology and Innovation in Barbados right now, welcome, because we need you to help us lead some of these conversations. You know, I will say that it seems to me that the people of this region are ready for change. And I think in particular of our recent experience in the region with digital identity. Now, Barbados started a process of moving from a plastic laminated ID card that those of us who've ever tried to get into a nightclub, not that I have, but those of us who've ever tried to get into a nightclub with one of those things, you're almost arrested on the spot because people think that you are trying to perpetrate a scam on the enterprise, on the entity that you're trying to gain access to. For years, Barbadians have complained about this card, the fact that it causes them embarrassment, quite frankly, and also the fact that it has not much utility, or had not much utility in people's minds. And so we started the process of moving to what we call our Trident ID, digital identity. And now one of the very important roles and functions of digital identity is to be able to serve as an incontrovertible proof of address. Now, proof of address may seem like a very straightforward thing for most people, and I do want to say too that we take for granted, I feel, this question of identity and the rights to which it entitles a person and what it means. In past lives, I've worked with countries, in other regions in particular, where identity is not guaranteed. The right to be identified with your country is not something that citizens of many other countries enjoy. And Barbados, again, has been a pioneer in making it clear that national identity is a right, and that carries with it a certain importance. But the very practical things that digital ID can do for citizens, for a population, something like proof of address. Now, there are many young people and others who may not be head of household or who may not be property owners, who may not be named on utility bills and so on, who need to show proof of address. If I am going to a financial institution to set up an account, they're going to ask for proof of address. Many people do not have that. It doesn't make them any less legitimate as a client, but they simply cannot produce a utility bill that says this is where I live. A digital ID that is able to provide incontrovertible proof validated by a national authority of a person's address is an asset that cannot be overstated. And so Jamaica before us, and then Barbados, began this process. And I dare say Jamaica had a different experience and a different trajectory in how that process went for them. But I say that the people of the region are ready for change because in Barbados, we had about a 90% uptake of the digital ID. So people newly registering to be able to have this digital ID. And interestingly, and I just read an article about this, the population over 50, in the population over 50 in Barbados, we had a 98% uptake in new registration for the digital ID. And I'll leave you in your discussions today to determine what that means. Because we make certain assumptions about the readiness of a population and who we believe is likely to be ready. But I think that our data is showing us perhaps something a little bit unexpected. But I start at the point of the Trident ID in our case, because like many other experiences that Barbados has had recently, it shows us the importance of dialogue on these matters, and really the tremendous importance of taking everyone along, not just in the technology itself, but in the conversation. People have to feel comfortable with where we are going. And sometimes the regulators and authorities ourselves are in a position where we are newly learning about new technologies. What are their opportunities? What are their risks? And what are the things that we all have to understand? And so our process in Barbados was one of having lots of conversations and consultations. But those conversations continue. The digital ID for us, apart from proof of address, is also a way for us to improve service delivery. And I emphasize this because the ministry that I have the honor to help lead, the Ministry of Industry, Innovation, Science, and Technology, was established in 2018 in a slightly different iteration to lead the digital transformation of Barbados. At the time, we envisioned a world where there would be perfectly seamless ease in accessing the services of government and others online. And we consider that the digital ID as a unique identifier. You present yourself to the government one time, rather than having to fill out countless forms over and over. One form asks you for one thing, another form asks you for something else. And we considered that this kind of identifier was very important in being able to make the lives of citizens easier in everything from accessing state benefits to registering a company and everything in between. And so we feel that while the mandate is clear, that the conversation is even more important. And we are thrilled to have the Company of the Caribbean chapter of the IIC to help us have some of those conversations. The e-services platform that I mentioned, where government services are available online, we are in the process of establishing that platform. It is not a straightforward exercise, especially in circumstances where different agencies of government have themselves had to initiate their own processes. And those of you in the room, most of you in the room who work in this area, know that the issues of interoperability of software, of technology, begin to present themselves when entities start to work in and establish different environments. For those of you who may have a lot of children or nieces or nephews or godchildren, it may feel a little bit like that if you invite them all over to the play park or for lunch at the same time. You have to make sure that everybody is getting along and that no damage will be caused from their presence together at the same time. And that is the best metaphor I can find for the issue of interoperability that we have to contend with. The Minister of Information, who welcomed you this morning, also made reference to the cybercrime bill that we brought to the lower house a few weeks ago. And I won't go too much into the content of that legislation. I will say that I consider it absolutely necessary, not just from the perspective of protection of children, not just from the perspective of protection of all individuals from false information, from the sharing of misinformation, but also from the perspective that where we are going is not possible unless people and systems are protected. You know, the irony is that in the conversation on digital IDs, one of the first questions people asked was, yes, but will my data be protected? Yes, but are your systems protected? And then immediately on bringing the cybercrime bill, they said, some, not all, said, I think this goes too far. to protect my data and systems. And that is why, and it's not to say that some of these concerns are not legitimate and valid. They absolutely are. And even in cases where we have the answer, the question is still important because it allows us to answer. But it's why I say that we need a particular balance brought to the conversation, brought to the dialogue in the public domain. And I believe that institutions such as yours are the perfect place, for, independent as you are, for these conversations to take place. I will emphasize at this time that I do consider it important to have solidarity in how we go forward. And notwithstanding that the cybercrime bill passed the lower house in Barbados, when it passed on to the upper house, I considered, and I spoke with the leaders of government business in both houses and the Prime Minister, and considered that perhaps we needed to pause for the avoidance of doubt and have this legislation go to one of our standing committees of Parliament. Not because we were not fully confident in its framing or in the need for it, but because we have seen how critical it is. Thank you. But because we have seen how critical it is for everyone to be along with us on this journey. And so I asked that we're not in any hurry. I asked that we pause, that we have the legislation go to Standing Committee of Parliament, that we have the consultations that are needed, that everyone has the opportunity to step forward and to present their concerns, and then sure-footed together, we take the legislation back to the upper house with any amendments deemed by the committee to be necessary, and we go forward together. This is just another example, along with the digital ID and others, of where we need that public dialogue. Perhaps the most immediate example that you've been seeing recently has to do with something that IIC also concerns itself with, which is the issue of digital infrastructure that is needed to take us to the next generation of networks. Now, I come from an activist background, and so I will always support the right of citizens to agitate. I welcome it. On the specific matter that is now occupying public discussion with respect to a particular piece of infrastructure that has recently been erected in St. James, the utility in question here, and I say this for full transparency, the utility in question here has been made to apply for planning permission, and the Planning and Development Department and that ministry will determine whether it has met the burden to receive such a permission. If not, the cell on wheels tower in question will be removed. But there is a wider conversation. The digital infrastructure that is needed to take us to the next generation of networks has to be the topic for a joint discussion. Barbados recently shared a physical development plan, the Barbados Physical Development Plan, and that looks at what is the use of land and resources that we need for all of the competing things that we have to do. So we need homes for people to live in. People are starting businesses every day. We need agricultural land to feed ourselves. There are all kinds of different commercial development. We need to protect the coastal environment. There are many competing resources and draws on our physical environment. How do we balance that? Now, in our small islands, the global benchmarks and knowledge are useful. But how do we engage in our own investigation of the human and social impacts of technology infrastructure and encourage a dialogue on balancing human need and expectation? The expectation to feel safe and enjoy the amenity of your surroundings. So when you look through the window, you see something that looks nice. So the expectation to feel safe and enjoy the amenity, but the demand of consumers, and it is a demand, to be and remain connected to the world using the latest in digital technology. And so we want to be safe and protected. In small islands like ours, where we can't take benchmarks from the US and the UK, who among us is doing the original research to be able to tell what do our benchmarks in this region look like? From where across our own islands, from our own people, will the innovation come to develop and roll out infrastructure that simultaneously meets these sometimes competing needs? That's the kind of innovation that we need today. As I put my talk this morning, I want to point to some of the things that I believe may need to concern this Caribbean chapter, that concerns us all. And I really regret, Alison, that I could not be here for the entire day, because you have some fascinating panels, and I have 1,000 questions for your panelists, but I may send them via WhatsApp to you, because I really wish that I could be here for some of your discussion. But there are many things that are on my mind as a new minister helping to lead on these issues. One has to do with the issue of data governance. Now, in 2019, Barbados passed the Data Protection Act. And it must be said that many of us who are developing legislation are doing so for our own citizens and our own purposes. But the timeline that is being established globally is not our timeline. The EU General Data Protection Regulation is one that created and arguably imposed certain response that countries like ours often need the resources to be able to explore. This is where regional functional cooperation has a very important role to play. Barbados need not consider these issues separately from St. Lucia, from Mexico, from Argentina, from Jamaica, from Trinidad and Tobago. It is, for us, a regional conversation. What is also a regional conversation is the issue of just transition for technology. Interestingly, this issue comes up all the time in conversations between the global north and south. It comes up with respect to climate. It comes up with respect to trade. In particular, recently, it has come up with respect to agriculture and agricultural trade. And here we are again on the issue of data governance and technology. And the notion that countries, developed countries, will not have conversations, will not do business with countries in the global south that have not met their burden for what is necessary to engage. Now, there's a lot that could be said about that particular posture. But what must be said in particular is that our countries in the region do not start at the same place. And they have not started at the same place because we have been made to in many cases sacrifice our own development because of historical factors outside of our control. It cannot then be a level playing field for us to address the issue of readiness to engage on these matters. And so, while Barbados has, and others in the region have, I would say, managed to leapfrog quite a bit in addressing issues of data protection and data privacy through our own Data Protection Act of 2019, there is a lot further that we have to go. We have to address in particular, and please don't be surprised if you see us revisiting the legislation for purposes related to medical data, the sharing of medical information. Because not that the legislation, Stephen, as you look at me quizzically, has to change, it is that the specific regulations that govern particular sets of data have to be specified. And people need to be made to feel sure and confident that yes, the Data Protection Act is sufficient, but that as we move to different areas of data and different kinds of data, that we have to give people the confidence that the legislation and the regulations adequately cover those areas. Now, one of the other areas that I believe is ripe for discussion is the use of data, not just for business, but the use of data as a business. The extent to which we make data available for people to be able to engage in the kinds of data analytics that are going to create knowledge products for people who want to know certain things. I think that Barbados and many others in this region is very well placed to be able to offer that kind of service with respect to our data. For that purpose, we need to, as Barbados is in the process of doing, make our data centers very robust and quite flexible in the extent to which we can also host other kinds of data sets, to the extent to which we can also host other data providers and other originators of data, so that far more work can be done with what we produce. Finally, in the area of what are the new things that we are discussing and must discuss, the question of online marketplaces and the access of our communities in CARICOM to those markets. And what does it mean? What does it look like? How do young creators and creatives monetize their intellectual property to be able to have access in a more, in a fairer way to some of those online marketplaces? It calls for global discussions. And I would like to think that we can count on the IIC as a partner in having some of those important conversations. Colleagues, the Declaration of St. George's towards the reduction of intra-CARICOM roaming charges to facilitate the CARICOM single market and economy was a step, a very important step in how we integrate on telecommunications and technology as a region. That work in itself has not finished, nor has the work on the idea of a single CARICOM IT space. We have before us a very clear roadmap of what we need to do. While, as I said earlier, we may have time to have the conversation, we don't have all the time in the world to have our economies, to have our people fully caught up to be able to take advantage of the business that can be created, of the opportunities in every sector from agriculture to health to education that AI, Internet of Things, and all of the other areas make possible for us. This Caribbean chapter of the IIC is, I hope and I expect, going to be quite critical and visible in helping not governments directly, but helping populations, helping stakeholders understand what we need to do and how we get there, not in a way that is adversarial, but how we get there together. I wish you a wonderful day of conversation, and I look forward to the future work of the IIC. Thank you.